If someone had told me 10 years ago, standing in that rented tuxedo with a flower wilting in my lapel, that the whole thing was a lie, I would have laughed. Not a real laugh, but the tight, polite one I had perfected for family gatherings and work parties. The one that said, I am fine. This is all fine. But it wasn't. Because the only true thing in that entire church was the man standing beside me, his hand a steady, warm weight on my shoulder. He was the best man, my best man. And in a life built on a foundation of careful falsehoods, my feelings for him were the one terrifying, unshakable truth. His name is Julian. Even now, the name feels solid in my mouth. It tastes like pine and sawdust and the cold bite of winter air. He was a mountain carved into the shape of a man, all broad shoulders and quiet confidence, while I was, and remain, a collection of loose threads and nervous energy. We were an unlikely pair, had been since college, a strange gravitational pull that made no sense to anyone, least of all me. He was the anchor, I was the drifting boat. He was the steady rhythm, I was the frantic, off-key melody. The wedding photos are still in a box somewhere in my mother's attic. In every single one, I'm looking at her, at Sarah, my wife. My ex-wife. I am smiling, but it's a photograph of a smile, a careful arrangement of facial muscles. In the candid shots, the ones taken between the poses, you can see it. You can see my eyes drifting, always drifting to the man standing just to my left. To Julian. He's looking straight ahead, a small, unreadable smile on his lips, but there's a tension in his jaw, a tightness, or maybe I just imagined it. I spent a decade imagining things. Now, my world is 4 white walls and a window that looks out onto a brick building identical to my own. The divorce was amicable, a quiet, sad dissolving of a thing that was never truly solid. Sarah was kind. She said I seemed absent, a ghost in my own life. She wasn't wrong. I had been haunting my own marriage for years, my heart a phantom limb reaching for a warmth that wasn't there. Not with her. My routine is my religion now. Wake at 6. Coffee black. Work, a silent cubicle where I arrange numbers into neat, predictable columns. Home, a meal for one, eaten while standing over the sink. The silence in this apartment is a physical presence. It has weight. It presses down on my chest, a heavy, woolen blanket I can't seem to throw off. It is the sound of a life unlived. Julian is still there, a constant orbiting satellite. He calls every Tuesday. Just checking in, Leo. His voice is a low rumble through the phone, a sound that feels like home in a way this empty apartment never will. I keep my answers short, clean. I'm good. Work is fine. No, I don't need anything lies. All of them. What I need is something I can never ask for. What I need is the man on the other end of the line. He's a contractor. He builds things. Decks, houses, additions. He takes broken things and makes them whole and strong. His hands, when I see him, are always dusted with sawdust, crisscrossed with small scars and calluses. They are capable hands. Hands that know how to hold, how to fix, how to create. I watch them when we meet for our monthly, awkward beer. I watch the way they hold a glass, the way they gesture when he talks about a difficult project. I have a universe of unspoken things tangled up in the sight of his hands. The distance between us now isn't just the miles to his house in the suburbs. It's the chasm of everything I never said. It's the ghost of my wedding, the ghost of Sarah, the ghost of the man I pretended to be for a decade. He sees me as his broken-hearted best friend, nursing the wounds of a failed marriage. The tragic, simple narrative. He has no idea that my heart was broken long before she left. It was broken on a sunny afternoon in a church, watching him watch me marry someone else. He is a fixed point in my sky, the North Star, and I am just a man in a small, empty room, looking out a window at a brick wall, wondering how long you can navigate by a star you can never, ever reach. He represents a life of authenticity I'm too cowardly to lead. He is solid earth, and I'm just air. A ghost, just like Sarah said. And the haunting is getting worse. Winter arrived like a judgment. It came swift and brutal, stripping the trees bare and encasing the city in a shell of gray ice. My sad little apartment, my sterile white box, became a tomb. The radiator hissed and clanked, a dying mechanical beast putting up a meager fight against the cold that seeped through the window frames. I wore sweaters indoors. I drank tea until my tongue was numb. The solitude, once a dull ache, sharpened into a blade. Then one Tuesday, the hissing stopped. Just like that. A sudden, profound silence that was somehow more menacing than the noise it replaced. I waited. I fiddled with the thermostat. I bled the radiator, a skill I'd learned from a YouTube video, scalded my hand with rusty water for my trouble. Nothing. The cold began to creep in, no longer just seeping but flooding the room. By evening, I could see my breath. My landlord was a disembodied voice on an answering machine. Leave a message. I left 3. Each one more desperate than the last. The temperature dropped. 5 degrees. 0. -2. I huddled under every blanket I owned, a pathetic burrito of misery, my teeth chattering a frantic rhythm against the silence. This was it. This was the pathetic end. Frozen to death in a cheap rental. My last words a plea to a slumlord's voicemail. Pride is a funny thing. It'll keep you warm for a little while, a smoldering, useless ember. But it's no match for a polar vortex. I scrolled through my phone, my fingers stiff and clumsy. There were names, colleagues, distant relatives, acquaintances. Each one felt impossible, an admission of failure too great to bear. And then there was his name, Julian, a solid, 4-syllable word that promised warmth. I stared at it for a full 10 minutes. Calling him felt like a surrender. A white flag waved from my frozen fortress of solitude. My thumb hovered over the call button. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. Don't be a burden. He has his own life. Don't do it. But the cold was a physical force, pushing me, and my pride finally shattered like a pane of ice. I pressed the button. He answered on the second ring. Lau, everything okay? His voice was rough with sleep, and a wave of guilt washed over me. It was after 11. Yeah. Hey, sorry to call so late. Stupid question, but my heat is out. L'endlordessemia. It's really cold in here. The words came out small and pathetic. There was a pause, not of hesitation, but of assessment. I could hear him shifting, the rustle of blankets. How cold? I can see my breath, I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. Jesus, Leo. Pack a bag. I'm coming to get you. There was no discussion. No, are you sure? No, maybe you could. Just a command. An instruction. He was a man of action, of solutions. He didn't deliberate. He moved. You don't have to do that, I protested, a weak, final stand for my shredded dignity. I can get a hotel or something. Don't be an idiot, he said. And the words, which from anyone else would have stung, were strangely comforting. A hotel? On the coldest night of the year? They'll be full or charging a fortune. I'll be there in 20. Pack for a few days. This cold snap is supposed to last. He hung up before I could argue. And just like that, the decision was made. The external event, the disruption. The universe, it seemed, had grown tired of my inertia. It had sent a blast of Arctic air to force me out of my sterile box and into his orbit. I moved on autopilot, throwing clothes into a duffel bag, my shivering hands fumbling with zippers. My mind was a blank, a sheet of white noise. I wasn't thinking about the implications, about sleeping under his roof, about being in his space. I was only thinking about the cold and the rumbling engine of a truck that was at that very moment driving through the frozen city to come and save me. Julian's house was the antithesis of my apartment. It was warm, not just in temperature, but in character. It smelled of wood smoke and coffee and something that was just him. The floors were dark, worn hardwood. The walls were lined with overflowing bookshelves, and a big, comfortable-looking leather couch dominated the living room. It was a space that was lived in, a space that had history. My duffel bag looked alien and out of place on the welcome mat. Guest rooms upstairs, he said, closing the door behind me and shutting out the biting wind. He took my bag from my hand before I could protest. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. You need anything? I just shook my head, still thawing, my senses overwhelmed. Being inside his home felt like an intrusion, a trespass into a world I was only ever meant to observe from a distance. The air was thick with his presence. Every object seemed to have been chosen by him, touched by him. It was an intimacy I wasn't prepared for. The guest room was simple, clean, a bed with a thick quilt, a wooden dresser, a single window looking out over a snow-covered backyard. It was more of a home than my own apartment. I stood in the middle of the room, feeling like an actor who had forgotten his lines. He reappeared in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs. "Tea," he said, handing one to me. "Should help." Our fingers brushed as I took it. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. It was nothing, an accident, a meaningless flicker of static electricity in the dry winter air. But my heart seized a sudden, violent lurch in my chest. I almost dropped the mug. I think he felt it, or saw it, a flicker of something in his eyes. Confusion? Or maybe, just maybe, recognition. He pulled his hand back quickly, his expression unreadable. "Well, get some sleep. Let me know if you need anything." He was gone before I could find my voice. I didn't sleep. I lay in the strange bed under the heavy quilt and listened to the sounds of his house. The groan of the pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of him moving around downstairs. Each sound was a reminder of where I was, of his proximity. Just a wall and a few feet of floorboards between us. My skin still tingled where our fingers had touched. A single, insignificant point of contact had set my entire nervous system on fire. It was pathetic, this desperate, starved reaction to a simple accident. The next few days fell into a strange domestic rhythm. I worked from his kitchen table, my laptop looking sleek and out of place on the rustic wood. He was in and out, his work boots leaving trails of melting snow on the mat. We existed in the same space, a quiet dance of polite accommodation. We made coffee. We talked about the weather. We avoided anything that mattered. But I watched him. I couldn't help it. I had spent years observing him from a safe distance. But this was different. This was close observation. I saw the way his brow furrowed in concentration when he was looking over blueprints at the counter. I noticed a small, white scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a detail I'd never seen before. I saw the deep weariness in his shoulders when he came home at the end of the day, a fatigue he never showed the rest of the world. He was not the simple, granite man I had built up in my mind. He was more complex, more fragile. I saw him one afternoon, standing in the backyard, staring at the woods behind his house, his expression lost and lonely. The confident facade had slipped just for a moment, and I saw a loneliness in him that mirrored my own. It was a revelation, a crack in the marble. One evening, I offered to make dinner. It was a desperate attempt to feel useful, to repay some of the kindness he was showing me. He seemed surprised, but agreed. We worked together in the small kitchen, a clumsy, unspoken choreography of 2 bodies trying to navigate a space meant for one. "Can you grab the olive oil?" he asked, his back to me as he chopped onions at the counter. I reached into the cabinet above his head. At the same moment, he turned, reaching for the same cabinet to get a spice. Our bodies collided. Not hard, but a soft, definitive press on my chest against his broad back. For a split second, we were frozen. I could feel the heat of him, the solid muscle, through his t-shirt. My breath hitched. My entire world narrowed to that single point of contact. He pulled away first, clearing his throat. "Sorry," he mumbled, not looking at me. "My fault," I said, my voice thin and reedy. The air in the kitchen changed. The comfortable silence became a tense, charged thing. It was a physical weight between us, pressing in. That single touch, that accidental intimacy, had triggered something. It had shaken the carefully constructed foundation of our friendship, and I could feel the fault lines beginning to show. The ground beneath my feet felt terrifyingly unstable. The thaw, when it came, was not gentle. It was a fever. It started 3 days into my stay. I woke up to the sound of a harsh, ragged cough from down the hall. Julian's room. I lay still, listening. Another cough, this one deeper, wetter. It sounded painful. I found him in the kitchen, slumped over the table, his head in his hands. His face was pale, sheened with sweat. He looked smaller, diminished. The mountain had crumbled. "You okay?" I asked, my voice soft. He looked up, and his eyes were glassy. "Just a cold," he rasped, his voice a gravelly ruin of its former self. "Don't worry about it." But it wasn't just a cold. By noon, he could barely stand. A violent flu had taken hold, burning through him with brutal efficiency. He surrendered, a rare and shocking thing to witness, and let me guide him back to his bed. The strong one, the one who fixed things, the one who had rescued me from my frozen apartment. He was completely, utterly vulnerable. The power dynamic shifted. It was a tectonic recalibration of our entire relationship. For the next 48 hours, I was the caregiver. I was the one bringing water and aspirin, making broth he couldn't eat, changing the sweat-soaked sheets. I moved around his room, his most private space, with a sense of dizzying surrealism. This was his bed. These were his clothes crumpled on a chair. That was the book on his nightstand. I saw him without his armor. I saw the flush of fever on his cheeks, the tremor in his powerful hands as he reached for a glass of water. I placed a cool cloth on his forehead, my fingers brushing against his temple. His skin was fire. He leaned into my touch, just for a second, a small, unconscious movement, a silent surrender. My heart did a slow, painful somersault in my chest. In his feverish sleep, he mumbled, names I didn't recognize, fragments of sentences about work. And then, once, so clearly it stole the air from my lungs, he said my name. Just that. Leo. It was a question and a statement all at once, a sound full of a strange, undefinable ache. I froze, standing by his bed, my own heart aching in response. Taking care of him felt right, more right than anything it felt in a very long time. It wasn't a burden. It was a purpose. In his weakness, I found a strange kind of strength. The anxious, overthinking ghost that lived in my head was silenced, replaced by a quiet competence. I knew what to do. I knew how to be gentle. I knew how to make him comfortable. For the first time, I was the anchor. He was the one adrift. On the third day, the fever broke. I found him sitting up in bed, looking weak but lucid. The glassiness was gone from his eyes. "Hey," he said, his voice still rough. "Hey yourself," I replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Welcome back." He looked at me, a long, searching look. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded sincerity. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried an immense weight. "For, all this, it was nothing," I said, trying to deflect, suddenly uncomfortable under the intensity of his gaze. "No," he insisted, his voice firm. "It wasn't nothing." He held my gaze for a moment longer, and in that look, something new passed between us. A new understanding. A new closeness born from fever and vulnerability. The distance between us had collapsed. We were no longer just the best man and the heartbroken groom. We were two people who had seen each other's weakness, who had cared for each other. The landscape of our friendship had been irrevocably altered, and I was terrified and hopeful in equal measure. The storm arrived without warning a week later. One minute the sky was a placid, bruised purple of late twilight. The next, the heavens opened. Rain came down in solid, wind-driven sheets, hammering against the roof and windows. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the house into a sudden, profound darkness. The only sound was the roar of the storm and the frantic, sudden thumping of my own heart. "Well, damn," Julian's voice came from the living room, calm and steady in the dark. A moment later, there was the scratch of a match, and a small, brave flame bloomed. He lit a few candles, their light casting long, dancing shadows that turned the familiar room into a strange and intimate cavern. We sat in the flickering light, the storm raging outside, creating a bubble of isolation around us. The world had been reduced to this single room, to the two of us. The easy rhythm we had found since his illness had returned, but tonight it felt different. The darkness was a confessional, the candlelight a truth serum. The usual pretenses felt flimsy, transparent. He had poured us each a glass of whiskey, and the amber liquid was warm in my hands. We sat in silence for a while, a comfortable quiet that slowly began to feel charged, heavy with unspoken things. The air was thick with them, Years of words swallowed and feelings buried. I don't know what made me speak. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was the intimacy of the darkness. Maybe it was just the cumulative weight of a decade of silence finally becoming too much to bear. I ever tell you, I began, my voice sounding strange and loud in the quiet room, how much you meant to me, standing up there at the wedding? He turned to look at me, his face half in shadow, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything, just waited. The words tumbled out, clumsy and honest. You were the only part of it that felt real. Everything else, the flowers, the music, her dress, it all felt like a play, a performance. But you were real. You were solid. My voice cracked on the last word. I took a shaky sip of whiskey. He was silent for a long time. The only sounds were the rain and the crackle of a candle wick. My stomach was a knot of pure dread. I had said too much. I had crossed a line, a carefully drawn boundary that had kept our friendship safe for all these years. I had ruined everything. I opened my mouth to backtrack, to apologize, to turn it into a joke, but he finally spoke, his voice low and rough. I almost didn't come. The admission stunned me into silence. What? Why? He stared into his glass, swirling the whiskey. Because watching you marry her felt like watching you walk off a cliff. And I was supposed to just stand there and smile and hand you the damn ring. He looked up at me then, and his eyes were dark with a pain that mirrored my own. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, Leo. The confession hung in the air between us, a raw and shocking thing. My carefully constructed reality, the one where my love was a secret, one-sided burden, shattered. All this time, I had been drowning, thinking I was alone, and he had been on the shore, watching, unable to reach me. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. The world had shrunk to the space between us, the few feet of rug that felt like a vast, yawning canyon. I could see the pulse beating in his throat. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the fear, the longing. He put his glass down on the coffee table with a soft click. He didn't move closer, but his gaze held me, intense and questioning. This was it, the precipice, a moment of choice that would change everything or nothing. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. It was a slow drift, a magnetic pull that finally, after a decade of resistance, became irresistible. The space between us shrank until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. His hand came up, slow, hesitant, and cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver down my spine. His hands, those capable, calloused hands, were trembling. His eyes searched mine in the flickering light, asking a question I couldn't have answered with words. I gave the only answer I could. I leaned in. The first kiss was not passionate. It was not frantic or demanding. It was a question. It was hesitant and soft, a gentle press of lips that tasted of whiskey and rain and years of unspoken longing. It was the most honest thing I had ever experienced. It was a confession, a surrender, an absolution. It was everything. And in the heart of the storm, surrounded by darkness for the first time in my life, I felt like I had finally come home. I woke up alone. The first thing I registered was the light. A pale, watery morning sun was filtering through the window, a stark contrast to the candlelit darkness of the night before. The storm had passed. The second thing I registered was the silence. The house was utterly, completely still. I was on the couch, a blanket tucked neatly around me. I didn't remember lying down. I remembered the kiss, a series of kisses slow and deep and full of a desperate, gentle discovery. We hadn't talked. We had just held each other in the dark, two survivors clinging to a raft after a shipwreck. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. My heart, which had felt so full and certain just hours before, began to shrink. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, seeped into my bones. I sat up. The candles were gone. Our whiskey glasses had been washed and put away. The room was tidy, sterile, all evidence of the previous night's intimacy erased. Julian, I called out, my voice a dry croak. Silence. I swung my legs off the couch and stood up. My body ached, a dull throb of anxiety already beginning to hum under my skin. I walked to the bottom of the stairs. Julian, I called again, louder this time. The silence that answered was absolute. It was an active, malevolent thing. His bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open. The bed was made. Perfectly made. The way you make a bed when you're leaving, not when you're just starting your day. I walked to the window. His truck, the big, beat-up Ford that was always parked in the driveway, was gone. The dread solidified into a block of ice in my stomach. He was gone. He had run. The morning after. The classic, brutal cliché. The intimacy had been too much. The confession had been a mistake. The kiss. God, the kiss had been a catastrophic miscalculation. I had read everything wrong. I had forced something on him in a moment of weakness, and he had fled. My mind began to race, a frantic spiral of self-recrimination. Idiot. You stupid, stupid idiot. You ruined it. You had his friendship, the one good, solid thing in your life, and you broke it. You smothered it with your own selfish need. The ghost I thought I had exorcised came roaring back, whispering all my deepest fears into my ear. I was a burden. I was a mistake. I was unlovable. I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state. I wandered through his silent house, every object a fresh torment. The mug he drank his coffee from, the jacket he'd left slung over a chair. The whole house was an echo of him, a painful reminder of his absence. The silence was a physical torment, pressing in on me, amplifying my panicked thoughts until they were screaming in my head. My old life, my solitary existence in the white box apartment, had been lonely. But this was worse. This was an absence. This was the gaping, raw wound left behind when something vital is torn away. I checked my phone 100 times. No calls. No texts. Nothing. I tried to call him once, around noon, but my courage failed. What would I even say? Hey, sorry about last night when I fundamentally changed our entire relationship and apparently sent you fleeing for the hills? The thought was so pathetic it made me nauseous. The next day was the same. A long, agonizing stretch of silence and waiting. The ice in my stomach spread through my veins. He wasn't coming back. Not while I was here. I had made his home, his sanctuary, unbearable for him. I had to leave. It was the only decent thing to do. I had to erase myself from his life, give him back his space, his peace. Maybe if I was lucky, in a year or two, we could pretend last night never happened. But I knew that was a lie. We could never go back. With a heavy, resigned heart, I went upstairs and began to pack my duffel bag. Each item of clothing I folded felt like a final, definitive act. The shirt I was wearing when he brought me here. The sweater I wore when I took care of him. Each one a memory, a testament to the hope I had briefly, foolishly allowed myself to feel. I zipped the bag shut. The sound was unnervingly final. I would call a cab, go to a hotel, and in the morning I would call my landlord and tell him he could keep the security deposit. I would find a new apartment, a new white box, and I would go back to being a ghost. I was carrying my bag down the stairs, my hand on the doorknob, when I heard it. The familiar, low rumble of his truck's engine. It pulled into the driveway. My heart stopped. For a full 30 seconds, I was paralyzed, caught between the primal urges to flee and to stay. I couldn't move. I just stood there, my knuckles white on the handle of my bag, and waited. The truck door slammed shut. Footsteps on the porch. The jingle of keys. The door opened. And there he was. He looked terrible. His face was pale and unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of 2 sleepless nights. He looked exhausted, haunted. He stopped dead when he saw me, his eyes flicking from my face down to the duffel bag in my hand. A flicker of something, panic pain, crossed his features. We just stood there for a moment, trapped in a tableau of misery and misunderstanding. The silence stretched, thin and fragile, threatening to snap. He spoke first, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of his worst fear. I couldn't find my voice. I just nodded, a pathetic, jerky movement in my head. He closed the door behind him and took a step into the entryway. He looked lost, broken. The strong, confident man I knew was gone, replaced by this raw, vulnerable stranger. "Don't," he said, the word a plea. My own fear and hurt finally boiled over into anger. "Don't?" You disappear for 2 days, Julian. No call, no text, nothing. You just run. What was I supposed to think? What was I supposed to do? I know, he said, running a hand through his messy hair. I know. I'm sorry. I panicked. You panicked? The words felt inadequate, insulting. Yes, I panicked, he said, his voice rising with a desperate energy. I drove to the coast and back. I just drove. I needed to think, and I couldn't do it here. I couldn't do it looking at you. He took another step closer. Leo, what happened the other night, it wasn't a mistake. Not for me. I stared at him, my brain struggling to process his words. Then why did you run? Because it's what I always do, he said, the confession ripped from him. I run. I've been running from this, from you, for years, my breath caught in my throat. Seeing you at that altar with her, it almost broke me. I buried it. I buried it so deep, I almost convinced myself it wasn't there. And then you came here, and I was taking care of you. And then you were taking care of me, and it came back. And that night, that kiss, it was everything I've wanted for 10 years. And it terrified me. He finally looked me in the eye, and his own were shining with unshed tears. It terrifies me because I don't know how to do this, how to be this. But I know I don't want to do it without you. And I came back and I saw you with that bag, and I thought I was too late. I thought I had scared you away for good. The anger and hurt inside me dissolved, washed away by the raw, aching honesty of his confession. All my fears, all my anxieties, they were his too. We were just two terrified men, fumbling in the dark, equally afraid of the light. I let go of my bag. It dropped to the floor with a soft thud. He closed the remaining distance between us. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, searching my face. Please don't leave, he whispered. I thought you wanted me to, I whispered back. I never want you to leave, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And then he reached down, picked up my duffel bag, and turned. He walked up the stairs, not to the guest room, but to his own room at the end of the hall. I followed him, my legs feeling unsteady. He walked into his bedroom and placed my bag at the foot of his bed. He turned back to me, standing in the doorway. Your stuff goes in here now, he said, his voice quiet but firm, a statement of fact. This is your room, too. It wasn't a question. It was a promise, a key, an anchor. It was the most profound, symbolic gesture of commitment I could ever imagine. It was everything. The days that followed were a study in quiet revelation. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for as long as I could remember began to recede. It was like a constant, low-grade fever that had finally broken, leaving behind a profound sense of peace and clarity. Waking up was no longer a solitary, silent affair. It was waking up to the solid, warm weight of Julian's arm draped over my chest, the soft sound of his breathing in the dim morning light. We learned each other's rhythms. The way he needed 2 full cups of coffee before he was capable of human speech. The way I hummed, off-key, when I was reading. We didn't talk much in the mornings. There was no need. We moved around each other in the kitchen, a comfortable practice dance. He'd make the coffee. I'd make the toast. It was a simple, domestic intimacy that felt more real and profound than any grand, romantic gesture. There were still moments of fear, a flicker of panic when I'd see him lost in thought, my mind instantly jumping to the conclusion that he was regretting this. A hesitation before reaching for his hand in public, the old habits of hiding dying hard. But he was always there to short-circuit the fear. He would see the look on my face, and he would reach for me, his hand closing around mine, a silent, firm reassurance. I'm here. I'm not running. We talked. We finally talked. We unspooled a decade of secrets, of near misses, of misunderstood glances and misinterpreted words. We laid our histories bare. He told me about the string of meaningless relationships he'd had, always keeping a part of himself back, a part he didn't understand until he saw me standing at that altar. I told him about the deep, hollow loneliness of my marriage, the constant performance of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. We were 2 cartographers, mapping out the hidden, lonely landscapes of each other's pasts. Sharing a bed with him was the greatest revelation. It wasn't just about the physical intimacy, which was a slow, tender exploration of its own. It was about the quiet moments. The feeling of his feet brushing against mine under the covers. The way he'd pull me closer in his sleep. Lying next to him in the dark, I felt a sense of safety, of belonging that I had never known. The four walls of his room didn't feel like a cage. They felt like a sanctuary. One Saturday morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, watching him at the stove, making pancakes. The sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. He was wearing an old, paint-splattered t-shirt and humming along to the radio, completely at ease. A wave of such intense love and gratitude washed over me that it almost took my breath away. He turned, spatula in hand, and caught me looking at him. He smiled, a real, easy smile that reached his eyes. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, my own lips curving into a smile that felt just as real. Just happy, and it was true. For the first time, it was completely, undeniably true. I think back to that man in the tuxedo, the ghost at his own wedding, and I barely recognize him. He lived a life of quiet desperation, a life built on the fear of what other people would think, a life dictated by a script he thought he was supposed to follow. He was so afraid of disrupting the status quo that he nearly erased himself completely. Julian was the disruption. He was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the storm that wrecked the flimsy stage set of my life, and in the aftermath, forced me to build something real, something strong. Loving him was a risk. It was terrifying. It required a bravery I never thought I possessed. But in risking everything, I found the one thing I had been searching for all along: myself. My home is not a place. It's not four walls or a roof. It's the steady, quiet presence of this man, the solid ground beneath my feet. It's waking up in the morning and knowing, with a certainty that stills my once frantic heart, that I am not alone. I'm not a ghost. I am real, and I am loved.